You're about to hear a story that will make your jaw drop. Imagine waking up one morning to a letter that feels like it could ruin everything you've worked for, your home, your peace of mind, your sense of security. That's exactly what happened to me. And it all started with something so minor, something so small that it seems almost absurd that it could escalate into a full-blown nightmare. Within the first 15 seconds of opening the envelope, I felt a surge of disbelief and confusion. My heart raced as I read the words that no homeowner should ever have to read. A formal notice from my Homeowners Association claiming I had violated a rule I didn't even know existed and threatening to take my home away. At first, I thought it must be a mistake. Surely this was some clerical error, some mix-up with another property, right? But as I read further, it became clear that no mistake had been made. The HOA had singled me out. My property, my home, my sanctuary was under attack because of a complaint that should have been resolved with a simple conversation or a polite warning. But this wasn't about fairness or common sense. It was about power, control, and a rigid enforcement system that leaves no room for humanity. I couldn't believe what I was reading. How could a minor complaint, something so trivial, spiral into a threat of losing my home? I sat down at my kitchen table, the letter trembling slightly in my hands, trying to process what was happening. The complaint itself was ridiculous in its nature, something so minor, a slightly overgrown shrub, a trash bin that may have been slightly visible from the street for a few hours, and a complaint lodged by a neighbor who seemed more interested in control than community. None of this should have escalated to legal threats, fines, or the ominous wording that suggested I could be forced out of the place I had called home for years. Yet here it was, staring back at me from the crisp white paper. The words seemed to mock me. Failure to comply will result in legal action and potential forfeiture of your property. I felt a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief. This was no longer about a minor rule. It was about my life being upended over something utterly insignificant. But here's where things got even more confusing. When I reached out to the HOA, trying to resolve the matter calmly and rationally, their responses were cold, impersonal, almost robotic. There was no room for dialogue, no acknowledgement that humans were involved. Instead, I was met with references to bylaws, fine print, and procedures that seemed designed to intimidate rather than clarify. Every email, every phone call seemed to tighten the noose a little more. It became painfully obvious that this wasn't just about the shrub or the bin or the complaint itself. It was about demonstrating power, about showing that they could enforce these rules without question. I began to realize that this was a battle I hadn't anticipated, one that could consume my time, my energy, and my peace of mind. At this point, I knew I needed a strategy. I couldn't simply ignore the situation. Doing so might confirm the HOA's control over me. I started documenting everything: the original complaint, my responses, timestamps, photographs, every small detail that could serve as evidence of my compliance and my good faith. It was painstaking work, but I knew it could be the difference between keeping my home and losing it. As I organized the documents, I also researched the HOA's bylaws, state laws, and homeowners' rights, trying to understand the legal landscape I was suddenly thrust into. What I discovered shocked me. There were rules written in ways that most homeowners would never read or understand, clauses that allowed the HOA to escalate minor issues into major threats with alarming ease. It was a bureaucratic nightmare designed to intimidate ordinary people like me. I realized then that the fight wasn't just for my home. It was a fight against a system that could crush anyone without warning. But as the tension built, there was a glimmer of hope. I found online forums and communities where other homeowners had faced similar situations. People shared stories, advice, and strategies for dealing with overreaching HOAs. I began to feel less alone, less powerless. I discovered that knowledge was power, and that the more I understood the process, the more control I could regain. Every story I read made me more determined, more resolute. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I wasn't going to let this minor complaint turn into a devastating loss. But the real question lingered. Would the HOA relent once they saw my evidence, or would this escalate further, dragging me into months of legal battles and financial strain? And then came the moment that changed everything, something I never saw coming. As I prepared my response, carefully crafting every word, I received a notice that was even more intense than the first. The HOA had scheduled a hearing, a formal, in-person hearing where I would have to justify my actions and defend my home. The reality of the situation hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a confrontation, a public, documented confrontation that could set the tone for the rest of my life as a homeowner. Anxiety, fear, and determination collided inside me. I knew I had to prepare meticulously. I had to anticipate every question, every challenge, and every trick they might use to intimidate me further. It was no longer about a shrub or a bin. It was about my rights, my property, and my sanity. And I realized something crucial. I was about to step into a battle I couldn't avoid, one that would test my patience, my courage, and my ability to stand up for myself against a system built to pressure ordinary people. By the time the hearing day approached, I had transformed from a homeowner bewildered by an absurd complaint into a strategic, prepared individual ready to defend what was rightfully mine. I had my evidence, my legal understanding, and my resolve. But the tension didn't lessen. It grew. The thought of standing in front of a panel, facing the possibility of fines, legal threats, and even eviction was terrifying. And yet, deep down, I knew that if I let fear control me, I would lose not just the battle, but the chance to assert my rights and protect my home. The stakes were higher than ever, and the story was only beginning.
You won't believe what happened next. The day of the HOA hearing finally arrived, and the tension in the air was almost tangible. I woke up that morning with a mix of anxiety, adrenaline, and determination. My stomach churned as I reviewed my documents one last time. Photographs aligned, emails organized, and legal references highlighted. Every step I had taken over the past few weeks was now coming to a head. This wasn't just a routine meeting. It was a confrontation that would decide the future of my home, and potentially my sanity. I knew the stakes were incredibly high, and yet, beneath the nervousness, a spark of confidence ignited. I had done my homework, I had evidence, and I was not going to be bullied into submission. Walking into the HOA office, I was immediately struck by the cold, impersonal atmosphere. The walls were adorned with certificates, policies, and rigid rules that seemed to radiate authority, almost daring anyone to challenge them. The board members sat behind a long, polished table, faces composed but sharp, exuding a quiet power that was almost intimidating. I took a deep breath, reminded myself of the evidence I had compiled, and reminded myself that I had every right to be there. I wasn't just defending my home, I was defending fairness, common sense, and my basic rights as a homeowner. From the very start, I could tell this was going to be a battle of wills. The hearing began formally with a procedural introduction. They outlined the complaint, reciting details that on the surface seemed minor, but carried an undercurrent of authority designed to unsettle me. As they spoke, I felt a surge of frustration. How could something as trivial as a minor shrub or an early morning trash bin become the center of such intense scrutiny? But I held my composure. I listened carefully, noting each point, each implication, and each potential exaggeration in their claims. This was my moment to respond strategically, not emotionally. I knew that reacting out of anger would only give them the upper hand. Calm, collected, and evidence-backed, that was my approach. When it was finally my turn to speak, I presented my case systematically. I began with the facts, timestamps, photographs, and emails that proved my compliance and proactive communication. I explained the situation calmly, demonstrating that the complaint was not only minor, but also already addressed in good faith. I could see the subtle shifts in their expressions, some skeptical, others slightly intrigued. I pressed on, referencing state laws and homeowners' rights, carefully highlighting how their actions were disproportionate to the complaint. With each piece of evidence, I felt my confidence grow. I wasn't just defending my home, I was making a point about fairness, reason, and accountability. Yet, despite the calm presentation, the tension never left the room. The board asked questions, some pointed, some seemingly designed to provoke. I anticipated each challenge, responding clearly and logically, refusing to be drawn into emotional arguments. At one point, a member suggested that minor infractions could lead to serious consequences, attempting to scare me into submission. I countered respectfully, citing legal precedents and the documented steps I had taken to remain in compliance. Slowly but surely, the balance of power shifted ever so slightly. They realized that I was not just a passive homeowner. I was prepared, informed, and unafraid to stand my ground. As the hearing continued, an unexpected twist occurred. Another homeowner, someone who had faced a similar situation in the past, spoke up in my favor. Their testimony added credibility to my claims and demonstrated a pattern of overreach by the HOA that could no longer be ignored. It was a moment of validation, a turning point that showed the board that they were not dealing with an isolated complaint, but a real concern affecting multiple residents. The room's energy shifted subtly, the tension morphing from intimidation to cautious respect. I could feel the momentum changing in my favor. After what felt like hours, the hearing drew to a close. The board members exchanged quiet discussions, referencing documents and deliberating over the evidence I had presented. I left the room with a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. I had given everything I had, armed with facts, legal knowledge, and unshakable resolve. The question now was, would it be enough to prevent the HOA from taking drastic action? The uncertainty hung over me, heavy but manageable. I had done all I could, but the final outcome would not be revealed until a formal decision was communicated in writing. It was a waiting game, and every passing hour stretched the tension tighter. That night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. What started as a minor complaint had transformed into an intense confrontation, a test of patience, research, and personal courage. I realized that many homeowners probably experience similar frustrations, caught in systems designed to favor bureaucracy over fairness. This experience had taught me that knowledge, preparation, and persistence were key weapons against unjust authority. Even a single individual, equipped with the right information and determination, could challenge an overreaching system and protect what mattered most. And yet, the story was far from over. The HOA's decision could still bring relief or further complications. As I prepared for the next chapter, the anticipation was almost unbearable. The day finally arrived when the HOA's decision was officially delivered. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, unassuming yet loaded with the weight of weeks of stress, research, and preparation. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and hope coursing through me. Every scenario I had imagined over the past weeks flashed through my mind. The worst-case nightmare where I could be forced out of my home over a trivial complaint, the more hopeful outcome where reason would prevail, and every possible twist in between. This was the moment that would decide everything. I tore open the envelope carefully, my eyes scanning the formal language, each line pulling me deeper into a swirl of suspense. And then I read it. Relief washed over me, intense and almost overwhelming. The HOA had ruled in my favor. They acknowledged the complaint had been minor, that I had addressed it proactively, and most importantly, that the threat of drastic action had been completely unnecessary. Every rule they cited as justification had been carefully weighed against the reality of the situation, and they finally conceded that their approach had been excessive. I exhaled, a laugh of disbelief escaping me. It had been a battle I feared might end in frustration, yet here I was, victorious. But the victory was more than just a personal triumph. As I reflected on the ordeal, I realized that this experience had highlighted a systemic problem. Many homeowners were subjected to overly strict enforcement over trivial issues, leaving families stressed and uncertain. By standing firm, by presenting evidence and calmly asserting my rights, I had not only protected my own home, but also set a precedent. My neighbors, many of whom had been quietly frustrated by similar overreaches, now had a tangible example of how persistence, preparation, and knowledge could combat bureaucracy. I felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that what I had done could ripple out and influence others. The aftermath was equally emotional. Friends and family who had supported me throughout the weeks called to celebrate, their voices filled with relief and joy. I recounted the details, from the intense hearing to the unexpected testimony that shifted the balance, each moment relived with gratitude for the support I had received.
Even the minor frustrations, the sleepless nights, and the constant anxiety now seemed like small prices to pay for the ultimate triumph. There was a lesson in every step of the journey. Preparation beats panic, knowledge beats intimidation, and courage beats fear. Despite the relief, I knew that vigilance was essential. Systems like the HOAs often shifted unpredictably, and the rules could change at a moment's notice. I took proactive steps to document everything moving forward, ensuring that future interactions would be straightforward and justified. This wasn't just about avoiding conflict, it was about creating a clear record, building a narrative of fairness, and maintaining control over what I could. It was empowering to realize that even in the face of authority, a well-prepared and informed individual could take charge, assert boundaries, and protect their life, property, and peace of mind. Looking back, the experience had transformed me. What started as a minor complaint about a small issue in my yard evolved into a full-scale test of patience, logic, and resilience. I had been forced to navigate formal procedures, interpret legal language, and maintain composure under pressure, all skills I now carried forward. It was a reminder that challenges often disguise opportunities for growth and empowerment. By engaging thoughtfully and calmly, I had turned a stressful situation into a story of triumph, one that others could learn from and find inspiration in. And then there was the emotional side, the relief, the joy, the satisfaction of knowing that justice, reason, and fairness had won. It wasn't just about the rules or the board's decision. It was about validating the principle that minor issues should not spiral into threats or unnecessary conflict. That principle now felt like a personal victory, a reminder that careful preparation, calm presentation, and unwavering commitment to fairness could genuinely influence outcomes, even in intimidating circumstances. The story, of course, didn't end there. Life went on, neighbors took notice, and the sense of confidence I had gained was tangible. I could engage with the HOA on future matters with clarity, assertiveness, and calm authority. More importantly, I could share my experience with others, offering guidance, reassurance, and hope to those who might find themselves in similar